Robert Russa Moton Museum. Constructed in 1939, the Robert Russa Moton High School was built for 180 students. By the 1940s, the student population reached over 450. The Moton Parent-Teachers Association lobbied the county to build a new school, but instead the county constructed 3 temporary buildings to be used as classrooms. They became known as the tar paper shacks. The deplorable conditions combined with the overcrowding prompted Barbara Johns to recruit her classmates to help her plan the student strike on April 23, 1951. Reverend L. Francis Griffin's home. This house was built in 1961 as the parsonage for First Baptist Church and was home to the Reverend L. Francis Griffin and his family. Known to many as the Fighting Preacher, Griffin was the preeminent civil rights leader in Prince Edward County and a trusted advisor to generations of young people. Griffin's first parsonage was located at the corner of Chambers and Ely Street, now Griffin Boulevard. In 1958, Longwood College purchased the property for the expansion of campus, and the Griffins had to relocate to this home. Race Street Baptist Church, Martha E. Forster home. 1 block east of here at the corner of Franklin and Race Street stands Martha E. Forster's home. A retired teacher, Martha E. Forster was among one of the 6 African American women who founded the Council of Colored Women in 1920. The council advocated for improved schools for children and was instrumental in improving the Farmville Training School, as well as in lobbying for the construction of the Robert Russa Moton High School, opened in 1939. 1 block west of here, at the corner of Franklin and Hill Street, stands Jericho Baptist Church, formerly called Race Street Baptist Church, founded in 1894. During the 1960s, the congregation supported the Reverend Griffin's leadership in civil rights activities. In 1967, the church was forced to relocate from its original location on the east side of Race Street between Redford and Franklin Streets to Hill Street when Longwood College used eminent domain to expand its campus. Jarman Auditorium at Longwood University. Constructed in 1951, Longwood University's auditorium was the site of a June 7, 1955 community meeting. About 1,250 Prince Edward County residents, the vast majority of whom were white, met to discuss what to do in response to the Supreme Court's ruling the previous month known as Brown 2, which declared that school desegregation should occur with all deliberate speed. The meeting resulted in the establishment of a foundation to fund a private segregated academy in the event that the courts ordered Prince Edward to desegregate, which occurred in 1959. John's Memorial Episcopal Church, Gordon Moss home. When small groups of African American students attempted to attend services at 4 downtown Farmville churches to integrate the traditionally white houses of worship on Sunday, July 28, 1963. John's Memorial, built in 1882, was the only one into which they were admitted. Gordon Moss, the chief academic officer at Longwood College, invited the protesters to sit in his pews. One of only a few prominent outspoken white voices against the closing of public schools, Moss's opposition incurred social and professional costs to his family and himself, including his leadership role at John's Memorial. Moss's home was located a block northeast at the current site of Bicentennial Park. High Street Monuments. The monument northeast of the intersection of Randolph and High Streets was dedicated in 1900 during the height of the Lost Cause period of white nostalgia for the Confederacy. Its inscription, "Defenders of State Sovereignty and Individual Liberties," provided the name to the 18-county organization supporting school segregation. They alleged the Brown versus Board decisions were part of a historical conflict between national and local authority. The monument southwest of the intersection was dedicated in 2018 to honor persons in the community who aspired to expand freedom and civil rights throughout American history. Named in the inscription are colonial orator Patrick Henry, members of the antebellum free black community of Israel Hill, Barbara Johns and her fellow 1951 Moton School strikers, and the black students locked out of public schools from 1959 to 1964. Farmville Herald offices. The Farmville Herald, published bi-weekly, was founded in 1890. J. Barry Wall purchased the Herald in 1921 and served as editor during the period of school closings. Under Wall's leadership, the Farmville Herald was a strident opponent of the Brown decision and championed local efforts to thwart desegregation and establish a county-wide system of private schools. Wall encouraged local citizens to stand steady against what he perceived as an overreaching federal government and the invasion of activist outsiders who disrupted the harmonious race relations in Farmville. Farmville Presbyterian Church. White residents of Prince Edward County were not unanimous in their response to closing the public schools, and differing opinions threatened to undermine established institutions, including Farmville Presbyterian Church, which was founded in 1844. Its pastor, the Reverend James R. Kennedy, spoke out against segregation and closing the public schools at a June 7, 1955, public meeting to discuss the preliminaries for a private, whites-only school. However, some members of the congregation opposed the South Carolina natives' response. Caught between his personal convictions and the will of his congregation, Kennedy elected to resign his post in June 1956 rather than divide the church. The basement of the church and others nearby served as classrooms for the white Prince Edward Academy when it opened in September 1959. J.J. Newberry Department Store. On Friday, July 26, 1963, 12 young African Americans from Prince Edward County staged a sit-in at a lunch counter in the J.J. Newberry Department Store, formerly located here. After the demonstrators left, employees removed the stools, preventing further sit-ins from taking place. Other protesters handed out leaflets calling on African Americans in surrounding counties to use their spending power as economic leverage and to boycott segregated businesses. They hoped to pressure businessmen into hiring African American employees and to exert pressure on the local officials to open the closed public schools. Farmville Baptist Church. Founded in 1836, Farmville Baptist Church was one of the 4 churches that young African American protesters attempted to integrate on Sunday, July 28, 1963, as part of a peaceful kneel-in. After being denied entrance to Farmville Baptist, the group of 6 adults and 17 students prayed and sung hymns on the church steps before being arrested for disturbing the public worship of God. The demonstrators were arrested and taken to the courthouse. The minors were released to their parents. The 6 adults refused bond and remained in custody. The growing number of protests surprised local law enforcement officials, and nearby jails were deputized to respond. Prince Edward County Courthouse. Prince Edward County Courthouse was the site of a May 20th, 1961 rally organized by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, to recognize the 7th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education and to protest the continued closure of the public schools. With over 1,000 people in attendance, Roy Wilkins, Executive Secretary of the National NAACP, and Oliver Hill, former head of the legal staff of the Virginia State Conference NAACP and newly appointed assistant to the Federal Housing Secretary, criticized local officials and state politicians for denying black children public education. College Shop. In addition to drawing attention to the absence of public education, African American students protested segregated businesses in downtown Farmville in 1963. On July 27th, demonstrators were barred from entering the College Shop restaurant, formerly located to the south of this building, and refused to leave the sidewalk outside. As police approached, the protesters went limp before being arrested. In contrast to the violent response to civil rights protests in the Deep South, local governmental officials here tried to halt demonstrations through bureaucratic means, refusing to issue parade permits and closing the streets. State Theater. On September 10, 1959, the Prince Edward County School Foundation began the inaugural year of the Prince Edward Academy with a ceremony in the theater formerly located here. Almost 1,500 school-age white children had enrolled in the private school established by white community leaders following the county's June 1959 decision to close the public schools rather than integrate them. The whites-only state theater was also a target for protests in the spring and summer of 1963. The picketers were primarily young local African Americans inspired by civil rights activities elsewhere, including in Birmingham, Alabama. Many of their parents were unable to join them due to the economic pressure that segregationists could exert on their jobs and on their credit in stores. Beulah AME Church and Parsonage. Founded in 1868, Beulah African Methodist Episcopal Church served as a center for civil rights organizing while Prince Edward County public schools were closed. In 1959, Beulah's minister, the Reverend A.I. Dunlap, made it possible for African American students who were seniors at Moton High School to attend Kittrell College in Henderson, North Carolina, to complete their high school education. The Reverend Goodwin Douglas, a native of Bermuda, who roomed with a Prince Edward County student at Kittrell, accepted a position at Beulah after graduation. He and the Reverend J. Samuel Williams, Jr., who was part of the 1951 walkout at Moton, helped organize the student protest of downtown businesses in the summer of 1963. Both ministers had experience in civil rights demonstrations elsewhere. First Baptist Church. First Baptist Church, led from 1949 to 1980 by the Reverend L. Francis Griffin, served as a spiritual and tactical center for the civil rights movement in Farmville. On April 25, 1951, 2 days after the Moton students commenced their strike, Barbara Johns and fellow organizers met with NAACP attorneys Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson in the basement of First Baptist. It was there that students convinced the attorneys to take their case contingent on their parents' approval and on the condition that the case would not simply ask the county to stop discriminating against the students, but challenge the constitutionality of segregation in public education. On May 3, 1951, the community packed First Baptist Church for a mass meeting where they enthusiastically supported the students in their case. In 1963, Reverend Griffin and the First Baptist Church again supported young people in organizing the boycott of downtown stores and direct action protests that summer. Dr. N.P. Miller's office in Farmville Shopping Center. Dr. Nathaniel P. Miller, a prominent African-American dentist, was active in many civic organizations, including the NAACP. While the public schools were closed, Dr. Miller allowed the American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker civil rights organization, to use his building and its headquarters when they came to help ameliorate race relations. Across the street, Farmville's first shopping center was picketed by the Prince Edward NAACP Youth Council beginning in July 1963. The demonstrations were a product of growing frustration of younger African Americans with the slow pace of the legal process to open the schools, as well as the lack of employment opportunities available downtown. The protests marked a shift in tactics from the courtroom to the streets to challenge segregation. Mary E. Branch School, the last stop on the Civil Rights Walking Tour. Originally called the Farmville Colored School, also Farmville No. 2 or Farmville Training School, this building was constructed in 1926 to serve as an elementary school. Grades 8 through 11 were added gradually, and in 1931 the school was renamed Robert Russa Moton High School. In 1939, when the new high school across Main Street opened and adopted that name, this school was renamed for Mary E. Branch, a native of Farmville who became president of the Tillotson College in Texas.